All right, let's just dive right into this. Have you ever found yourself, staring at the ceiling at like 2 in the morning, wrestling with a feeling that completely betrays your own logic? You're wide awake, your chest is tight, and you're trying to rationalize something that honestly just feels impossible to rationalize. Today, we're exploring one of the most frustrating, deeply confusing paradoxes of the human mind. We're looking at a dynamic that pretty much everyone experiences at some point, but almost nobody wants to talk about out of sheer embarrassment. In this explainer, we're going to untangle a highly specific, deeply painful emotional knot. Why we miss the people who hurt us.
So why does your heart miss the very person who caused you pain? When you really think about it, it kind of feels like the ultimate betrayal, doesn't it? And not just the betrayal from them, but this awful feeling of being betrayed by your own heart. You've gone through the fallout, you've survived the worst of the storm, and yet there's this lingering magnetic pull right back to the source of the injury. Listen, if you have ever felt this, I want to validate you right now because you are absolutely not alone. But the really crucial point here is that a huge chunk of this longing is driven by our brain's intense, hardwired craving for familiarity. Our minds naturally develop these deep emotional attachments to what is known because, historically speaking, familiar meant safe. Even if that familiarity is causing you immense pain, your nervous system still recognizes that person as a deeply ingrained part of your environment.
And here is literally the most agonizing part of the whole experience. It just doesn't make sense. Logic completely fails us in these moments because you're actually dealing with two entirely different parts of your brain actively fighting for control. On one hand, you've got the prefrontal cortex. That's your logical reasoning center. It acts as this highly advanced survival machine, basically telling you, hey, you touched a hot stove, let's absolutely never do that again. But then on the other hand, you have the amygdala, the emotional, raw, survival-driven core of your brain. The amygdala doesn't do logic. It processes deep emotional memory and pure attachment. So the internal conflict is just deafening. Your rational brain is screaming at you to run away, while your emotional brain is desperately clinging to the attachment it formed.
Let's actually look at the facts for a second and see how this builds our conscious reality. Here's the undeniable timeline of the betrayal. 1, they hurt you. 2, they lied. 3, they broke your trust. Your conscious brain holds these facts as absolute truths. I mean, it's an airtight case. You can point to each specific painful event and say, yes, that happened. The trust was totally shattered. But this is where emotional memory plays a fascinating, honestly kind of cruel trick on us. Our brains have this profound tendency to remember emotional highs way more vividly than emotional pain. So while your logical brain is meticulously cataloging this list of wrongdoings, your emotional memory is actively suppressing the bad times in favor of the intensely good times. It creates this massive cognitive dissonance that just leaves you feeling completely disoriented. Yet somehow, well, just let that contrast breathe for a second. We've got the cold, hard facts of the betrayal on one side, and then this incredible, frustrating gap between what you logically know and what you inescapably feel. This brick wall you're hitting right now, it's incredibly common, and it's largely the result of a psychological concept called intermittent reinforcement. You see, the person who hurt you didn't hurt you 100% of the time. Every now and then they offered intense kindness or deep love or validation. This totally unpredictable mixing of extreme emotional highs with devastating lows, it completely scrambles your brain, making the occasional reward of their affection highly, highly addictive. And so you still miss them. Despite the mountain of evidence, despite all the tears, this inescapable emotional reality remains. But what you're experiencing here isn't just missing someone in the normal everyday sense. You are very likely dealing with the hallmarks of a trauma bond. A trauma bond is a deep biological attachment born directly from a cycle of abuse, devaluation, and that unpredictable positive reinforcement we were just talking about. I know, it feels like a cruel joke played by your own emotions. You endure all that hardship, and your quote-unquote reward is this lingering ache for their presence. But it is so vital to recognize that this ache is actually a biological adaptation to a highly volatile environment. So, why? If the facts of the betrayal are so crystal clear, why on earth does this intense longing persist? To answer that, we really have to look beneath our surface-level feelings and look directly at our brain chemistry. We need to move past the emotional heartbreak for a minute and investigate the concrete neurochemistry driving this whole paradox. Specifically, we've got to talk about how your brain processes a chemical called dopamine. This is the exact same neurotransmitter responsible for motivation, reward, and, unfortunately, addiction. And this brings us to a really crucial distinction: the false assumption of weakness versus the reality of psychology. When you miss someone who hurt you, the immediate, knee-jerk reaction is intense self-blame, isn't it? You tell yourself,
I'm weak, I have zero willpower, I have no self-respect. But we've got to peel back that layer of shame right now, because the reality is that this psychology mimics addiction perfectly. The extreme highs and agonizing lows of a toxic relationship create massive dopamine spikes. Your brain literally gets addicted to the chemical rush of the reconciliation phase. It mimics the exact same chemical dependency a gambler experiences when they're sitting at a slot machine, just waiting for that next unpredictable payout.
Let's focus strictly on that word for a second: weakness. Or, more specifically, what this feeling is absolutely not. Missing the person who lied to you and broke your trust is not a flaw in your character. It is not a moral failing. What you are experiencing is, quite literally, a form of chemical withdrawal. When you're separated from the person who hurt you, your brain experiences a severe dopamine deficit. It's craving its familiar source of dopamine even though it logically knows that source is highly toxic. Blaming yourself for what is essentially a natural chemical withdrawal, that only adds a secondary layer of intense shame to the original injury. Which brings us to the core thesis of our explainer today. The answer isn't weakness, it's psychology. This single statement is immensely powerful because it completely relieves you of the guilt. It shifts the blame entirely away from your character. It's trauma bonding, it's intermittent reinforcement, it's dopamine withdrawal, and it's your emotional memory totally overriding your prefrontal logic. You are not weak. Your nervous system is simply trying to regulate itself after being subjected to a deeply complex, highly addictive, and really damaging cycle.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Now that you know it's psychology, how will you let this change the way you heal? If we completely remove the shame, if we recognize that healing actually means breaking a chemical bond and not just getting over a broken heart, what does your path forward look like? Honestly, it should look like immense self-compassion. The next time that heavy wave of missing them hits you, instead of beating yourself up, recognize it for what it truly is: a biological echo, a dopamine craving, and a psychological process. It is not a life sentence. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you look at your own mind with a bit more scientific curiosity and a whole lot more kindness.